The rain had been falling since dawn, turning the empty lot behind the old warehouse into a mix of mud, trash, and cold puddles. The boy moved through it with slow steps, holding his thin jacket closed with one hand. His stomach had been empty since the previous evening, and the damp fabric pressed against his ribs. He kept looking around, checking if the men who usually hung near the loading dock were still gone. They shouted at him when they saw him. Sometimes they threw things. He tried to avoid them. A faint whimper cut through the noise of the rain. At first, he thought it was a tire scraping on wet concrete, but it came again, weaker. He followed the sound to a collapsed wooden pallet. A small puppy curled under it, soaked, limping and too tired to move. One leg was stiff, its breathing was uneven, fast and shallow. The boy reached out slowly, unsure if it would bite, but the puppy only tried to lift its head before giving up. It had no strength. He slid his hands under the animal, feeling the bones through its wet fur. The puppy didn't fight. It just trembled. The boy held it close to his chest, giving it what little warmth he had. The rain kept falling, and he looked around for a safer place. The only shelter he knew was the narrow space behind a cracked concrete wall behind the warehouse. He went there, sat on the ground, and placed the puppy on his lap. It tried to lick water off its nose, but couldn't lift its head for long. Somewhere far down the road, a motorcycle engine echoed for a few seconds before fading. The boy had heard people in town talk about a group of bikers who rode on the outskirts, Steel Guardians. Adults mentioned them in lowered voices, not with fear, but with caution. They were never seen causing trouble, yet everyone seemed to know they handled things their own way. The boy didn't know if they were real. To him, they were just part of the noise grown-ups talked about. The puppy twitched when thunder rolled across the sky. Its eyes closed halfway, then opened again, as if it feared being left alone. The boy pressed his palm gently over its chest. He didn't know what to do next. He only knew he couldn't walk away. The rain made the lot feel even more abandoned. The boy felt small inside it, barefoot, hungry, and unsure how long he could protect something weaker than himself. But he stayed still, trying to keep the puppy warm enough to survive the next few minutes. The boy had been drifting between temporary roofs for months. Sometimes he slept in an abandoned bus behind the scrapyard. Other nights he stayed under a loading ramp where the wind couldn't reach him. He had learned to stay quiet, move slowly, and avoid adults who asked too many questions or none at all. His days were a pattern of searching for leftover food, checking trash bins behind a small bakery, and trying not to attract attention. He found the puppy 2 days earlier, lying near a dumpster with a gash on its front leg. It hadn't looked as defeated then. It had barked once, a thin sound, before trying to drag itself away. The boy had crouched and waited. When the puppy realized he wasn't trying to hurt it, it stopped crawling. He gave it a piece of stale bread he'd saved. The puppy couldn't chew well, but it tried. That was enough for the boy to return the next morning. He found it in the same place, weaker than before, shaking from the cold. The boy started visiting it every time he could. He tore strips from an old shirt he carried and wrapped the puppy's leg. It wasn't much, but it kept the wound from scraping against the ground. He shared whatever scraps he found. Sometimes he pretended the puppy was full so he could ignore the hunger twisting inside his own stomach. The puppy followed him in wobbly steps whenever it could stand. The adults at the warehouse didn't like seeing him around. They complained he was clogging walkways, touching things, attracting trouble. One man shoved him aside the previous week. Another told him he shouldn't be there at all. No one noticed the puppy. No one cared that a boy, barefoot and alone, tried to keep something alive. There used to be an aunt who let him sleep on her couch. She worked nights and didn't talk much. When her boyfriend moved in, things changed. The boy stayed quiet, tried not to disturb anything, but that wasn't enough. After a long argument that ended with the boyfriend throwing his school backpack into the hallway, the boy knew he couldn't stay. He left with nothing but a torn jacket and a few coins he'd saved. No one came after him. The puppy became the first living thing that didn't push him away. It leaned against his leg when it managed to walk. If he stopped moving, it sat beside him until he began again. When he whispered apologies for not having real food, the puppy just blinked and stayed close. It didn't judge. It didn't expect anything. The rain in the present day only made things harder. The boy had tried to keep the puppy dry with his jacket, but the wind kept opening it. He thought about taking the animal to the small vet clinic near the main road, but he feared the questions. Adults asked where he lived, where his parents were, why he wasn't in school. He didn't have answers they wanted. He only had the puppy, breathing unevenly against his chest, trusting him without knowing why. For the boy, that trust was the only thing that felt like it belonged to him. The next days blurred into a routine built on worry. The rain eased, but the cold settled in. The boy kept the puppy close, carrying it wrapped inside his jacket when its injured leg refused to support its weight. He checked the wound each morning. The makeshift bandage stayed damp, and the edges of the gash looked swollen. The puppy winced whenever he touched it, then pressed its nose against his wrist, as if asking for reassurance it couldn't understand. He tried to find food earlier each day before the warehouse men arrived. One morning he reached for a half-eaten sandwich thrown near a trash bin, only to hear footsteps behind him. A man kicked the sandwich away and told him to stop making a mess. The boy froze, eyes down, waiting for the moment to pass. The puppy, hidden under his jacket, stirred nervously. Its head poked out for a second, and the man muttered something about strays carrying disease. The boy hurried off before the confrontation escalated. He walked to the bakery behind the main avenue. The owner sometimes left stale bread in a crate near the door. That morning the crate was empty. The boy stood there too long, hoping something would appear. A woman leaving the bakery glanced at him, then at the puppy's head visible under the jacket. She hesitated but kept walking. People often did that. They saw the situation, but their steps didn't slow. The puppy sensed every shift in the boy's breathing. When the boy grew tense, the puppy lifted its head, following the direction of the tension. When the boy curled his shoulders, the puppy tucked itself closer, learning that silence was safer than movement. Its instincts sharpened as the days passed. Ears twitching at sudden noises, body stiffening when someone approached too quickly. The wound made it fragile, but fear gave it alertness. By late afternoon, the boy tried to rest behind the warehouse wall. He leaned back, exhausted, and the puppy settled on his lap. The boy closed his eyes for a moment. A metal door slammed somewhere behind him. He jolted awake. Voices echoed, harsh and impatient. Someone had seen him earlier and complained he was still around. He heard one man mention calling someone to clear the lot. Another said kids like him only brought trouble. Their words weren't spoken to him directly, but they didn't need to be. The message was always the same. He wasn't wanted there. He gathered his things quickly, clutching the puppy against his chest. His hands trembled. He moved toward the street, staying close to the wall, head down. The puppy looked up at him, sensing something was wrong. The boy whispered nothing. He didn't dare draw attention. Across the road, a motorcycle passed at a steady pace. The boy didn't look up, but he felt the vibration through the ground. He recognized the distinct rumble other kids had pointed out before. Steel Guardians. Riders who didn't spend time in town unless they had a reason. The bike disappeared beyond the curve, but its presence lingered in the boy's mind. He wondered briefly if they ever noticed kids like him on the sidewalks. Probably not. The day ended with the boy hiding behind the old bus near the scrapyard. He sat on the floor and held the puppy, who now shook intermittently. Its breathing grew uneven when the temperature dropped. The boy wrapped it tighter inside his jacket and pressed his cheek against the top of its head. He didn't sleep. He spent the night listening to distant dogs bark, metal clank, cars slow down, and wind move through broken windows of abandoned buildings. His chest hurt with a type of fear he couldn't name, not fear of a person, but fear that he wouldn't be enough to keep the puppy alive. The cycle repeated each day: hunger, cold, searching, hiding, avoiding eyes that pretended not to see him. And each day the puppy grew a little weaker, but it still lifted its head whenever he whispered its name, a name he hadn't really chosen, just a sound he repeated when he needed the animal to focus. It always answered. By the 4th week on the streets, the boy felt the weight of exhaustion in every movement. His legs shook when he stood too quickly. His vision blurred when he hadn't eaten for too long. The puppy, once able to follow him in small steps, now struggled even to sit up. Its injured leg had stiffened, and the swelling spread into the shoulder. The boy knew infections got worse without help. He didn't know how fast. He only knew the puppy slept longer each day and woke with a small cry that cut straight through him. He tried to keep their routine steady. Morning meant checking the bakery crate. Afternoon meant searching the warehouse edge for dropped scraps. Evening meant returning to the old bus. But each part of the routine was falling apart. Workers at the warehouse had started recognizing him. One pointed at him from the loading dock and told others he'd seen the boy digging around pallets. Another warned that thieves sometimes used kids as lookouts. The boy didn't understand the accusation, but he understood the tone. It wasn't curiosity, it was preparation for forcing him out. He avoided the warehouse after that, but avoiding it meant losing the only semi-safe place he had found. The bus near the scrapyard wasn't much better. 2 men had taken shelter inside a few nights earlier. Their slurred voices drifted through the windows. The boy stayed hidden the entire night behind the bus wheels, hugging the puppy to keep it warm. The puppy whimpered at every loud sound. The boy whispered steady breaths into its fur, trying to calm both of them. During one of those nights, the boy heard motorcycles far off, riding in a slow formation. Their engines were deep and synchronized. The sound didn't fade quickly the way cars did. It passed with a strange weight, like the riders were moving with purpose. A mechanic at the scrapyard once said, "The Steel Guardians rode like that, steady, measured, always in control." The boy had never seen them up close, but the sound lingered in his mind. He wondered who they protected. He wondered if anyone had ever protected them. By the next morning, the puppy worsened. Its breath had become sharp, almost wheezing. The boy checked the wound and saw the bandage soaked through. He peeled the fabric away. The skin around the gash had turned dark and hot to the touch. The puppy jerked its head away but didn't fight. That scared him more than anything. He felt the moment slipping into something he couldn't reverse. He walked toward the main road, unsure what he planned to do. Maybe he would risk the vet clinic. Maybe he would beg. Maybe someone would notice the shaking bundle in his arms and see something human instead of trouble. He reached the sidewalk and stood there, unable to step inside the building. Cars passed. People passed. No one slowed. A delivery van splashed a puddle across his legs. He didn't move. The puppy pressed its face against his chest, exhausted. He turned around and walked away before someone yelled at him for blocking the doorway. Back behind the bakery, the owner's son saw him crouched near the wall. The boy kept his head down, hoping to be ignored. But the son walked closer and muttered something sharp about filthy strays and kids who didn't belong in the area. The boy stood, holding the puppy tight. He didn't answer. Answering only made adults angrier. The man reached out as if to push him aside. The puppy bared its teeth weakly, a soft, trembling growl escaping its throat. The man recoiled, swore under his breath, and walked away. The boy felt his throat close. The puppy had tried to protect him even in its fragile state. The boy knew the animal shouldn't be defending anything. It needed help, real help, the kind he couldn't give. He sat behind the bakery until the sky darkened again, holding the puppy and trying to plan something that didn't exist. Later, while moving through a narrow alley, he heard footsteps behind him, voices he recognized from the warehouse. The tone had changed, less annoyance, more intent. He picked up his pace, clutching the puppy. His heart pounded. He didn't know what they wanted, only that their presence at this hour felt wrong. He ducked behind a dumpster, pressing himself against the metal. The footsteps grew louder, then paused. One of the men muttered about finding him near the bakery. Another said they were tired of kids causing problems near the lot. The boy stayed still, barely breathing. The puppy's trembling returned, stronger now, almost frantic. It sensed danger before he could name it. The men moved farther down the alley. The boy waited until their voices faded, then slipped out and ran. His legs barely carried him. He didn't stop until he reached the road near the outskirts, where traffic thinned and buildings turned into long stretches of fences and storage units. A single motorcycle passed, going the opposite direction. The rider wore a black vest with a symbol he recognized from overheard conversations, a silver shield with a faint pair of wings etched behind it. Steel Guardians. The rider didn't turn, didn't slow, didn't look at the boy, but the sound followed him long after the bike disappeared. The boy stopped walking. His knees weakened. The puppy sagged in his arms. Everything felt one step away from collapsing. His body, the puppy's breathing, the thin thread keeping them unnoticed. The day had stripped away what little safety remained. The breaking point wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It arrived quietly, settling into his chest as he understood that avoiding danger was no longer enough. The world around him was closing in, and he had nothing left to trade for time. Boy saves a hurt puppy in the rain. He didn't know it belonged to a biker's little girl. The rain returned without warning. Thick drops hit the ground fast, creating shallow streams along the road's edge. The boy tried to shield the puppy with his jacket, but the fabric was too thin. The puppy's breathing grew harsher. Its head dropped forward each time the boy shifted his grip. He felt the animal slipping in and out of responsiveness, and panic rose in his throat. He crossed the road toward a row of shipping containers where he sometimes hid. The rain turned the dirt into slippery mud. As he stepped onto the lot, a voice shouted from behind him. Heavy footsteps approached. The same warehouse men had followed him farther than he expected. One yelled that he was tired of kids trespassing and stealing. Another grabbed the boy's arm, yanking him backward hard enough to make him slip. The puppy cried out, a sharp, sudden sound that cut through the rain. The boy fell to his knees. Mud splashed up his legs. The puppy rolled from his arms and hit the ground, trying instinctively to stand, but collapsing immediately. It dragged itself toward him, confused and shaking. One of the men cursed at the sight of the dog and raised a boot as if to kick it out of the way. The boy lunged, shielding the puppy with his body. His arms tightened around it. The puppy growled weakly, a thin line of effort that came from instinct more than strength. The man hesitated only a second before stepping closer. What happened next was small, but decisive. The puppy pushed its head forward and snapped. Not a strong bite, not a real threat, but a desperate attempt to defend the only person who had stayed beside it. The movement was clumsy, and it fell immediately after, but the intention was clear. The boy held it tighter, bracing for the man's reaction. A motorcycle engine cut through the rain. It wasn't a passing sound. It stopped sharply at the edge of the lot. A second engine followed, then a third. The men turned. The boy turned too, though he kept his arms locked around the puppy. 3 riders stood near their bikes, rain dripping from their jackets. Their vests were marked with the same symbol the boy had seen before, the silver shield with worn edges, Steel Guardians. They didn't move fast or wide. They stepped forward with controlled purpose, their presence steady and unforced. The man closest to the boy tried to explain something about chasing off trespassers, but his voice cracked. One of the bikers, a broad figure with a scar running down his jaw, knelt and looked at the puppy. His expression stayed calm, but his posture shifted with recognition. He lifted the puppy gently, supporting the injured leg. The puppy weakly pressed its nose to his wrist. The biker exhaled. A subtle tension moved through his shoulders. He said the dog belonged to his little girl. She had been searching for it for over a week. She cried every night, asking if someone had found it. The puppy responded to his voice, eyes half open, tail barely moving. The man who had been yelling stepped back, realizing the weight of what he had almost done. Another biker, leaner and older, asked the men why they were cornering a kid in the rain. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. The men offered excuses, loitering, rumors of kids causing problems, not knowing whose property was whose. None of it held. A third biker approached the boy. He didn't touch him. He didn't crowd him. He simply crouched, staying at eye level, letting the boy breathe. He pointed out the bruises on the boy's arm where he had been grabbed. The men tried to deny responsibility. The bikers didn't raise their voices. They didn't threaten. They didn't need to. Their silence felt heavier than shouting. The biker holding the puppy stood and signaled subtly to the others. They understood immediately. One guided the men backward, separating them from the boy without force, only posture. The men stepped away on their own. The boy stayed frozen, unsure what came next. Rain flattened his hair against his forehead. Mud soaked through his pants. His hands trembled from adrenaline and hunger. He watched the biker cradle the puppy carefully, adjusting support under the injured limb, as if he had done it many times for many injured creatures. The biker told the boy that his daughter never stopped hoping the puppy was alive. The boy lowered his head, unsure how to respond. He felt torn between relief and fear of losing the only companionship he had known for weeks. The puppy lifted its head weakly toward him, even while resting in the biker's arms. The boy reached out and touched its nose. The biker saw the hesitation and realized the connection between them. Something softened in his face, not pity, but understanding. Rain hit the ground harder. The Steel Guardians surrounded the boy and the puppy in a loose protective arc, not closing him in, not trapping him, just standing between him and the men who had walked away. For the first time in weeks, the boy didn't feel like he had to run. The rain slowed to a steady drizzle as the bikers guided the boy toward their motorcycles. They didn't touch him, but they stayed close enough that he felt the shift in safety. The men who had chased him were gone, their silhouettes shrinking down the road. No one else lingered in the lot. The world felt smaller and quieter, and the boy didn't know how to carry that sudden quiet in his chest. The biker holding the puppy inspected its leg again. He adjusted the bandage the boy had made from a torn shirt. The fabric was soaked and starting to come apart. The biker didn't criticize it, he just nodded, as if acknowledging the effort behind it. Another rider fetched a small kit from his saddlebag: gauze, disinfectant, tape. The tools were simple and worn. These men looked like they'd patched wounds on the road many times. They worked under the shelter of an overhang. One biker crouched beside the boy and asked him to hold the puppy's head gently while they cleaned the wound. The boy steadied it with both hands. The puppy whimpered, but it didn't panic. It looked at the boy between breaths, grounding itself the way it always had. The bikers cleaned the gash slowly, explaining each step so the boy wouldn't think they were hurting it without purpose. When they finished, the swelling looked less angry. The leg was wrapped properly, firm but not too tight. The boy stared at the clean bandage, as if unsure he was allowed to look at something that neat. The broad-shouldered biker, the one who recognized the puppy, stood and said he needed to get it to a vet immediately. Another biker started his motorcycle, preparing to escort them. Before leaving, the man crouched down again and told the boy his daughter would want to know who kept her dog alive. The boy felt something tighten in his throat. He didn't know how to react to being acknowledged for anything. One of the riders stayed behind with him. He was older, with a tired calm in his expression. He asked the boy if he had eaten. The boy didn't answer. His silence was answer enough. The biker opened a small pack and handed him a wrapped sandwich and a bottle of water. No pressure, no questions, just an offering. The boy ate slowly, every bite heavy after days of near hunger. The puppy had always eaten first. He wasn't used to taking the bigger share. Neighbors from across the road watched from their windows. They saw the bikers, saw the boy, saw the wound on the puppy's leg. Someone stepped outside and asked if they needed blankets. Another brought a dry towel. People who had never spoken to the boy before suddenly noticed him. The presence of the Steel Guardians had shifted the air. Not through intimidation, but through clarity. Something serious had happened, and ignoring it wasn't an option anymore. When the puppy was secured on the biker's motorcycle, wrapped in a thick towel, held carefully by the man who kept checking its breathing, the older rider asked the boy where he usually stayed. The boy hesitated. He didn't want to lose the little privacy he had, even if it was made of broken metal and scattered trash. But the biker didn't push. He only asked if the boy wanted shelter for the night, not a permanent solution, not a promise he couldn't keep, just a place to stay dry and safe for one night. The boy nodded once. They led him to a small community garage the bikers used when passing through town. It wasn't much, a corner with a heater, a stack of old blankets, a workbench with tools, the smell of oil and rust. But it was warm, and no one hurried him. One biker checked the doors, making sure everything was secure. Another hung his wet jacket near the heater and offered the boy a dry one. The boy sat on a thick blanket, knees pulled to his chest. He listened to the distant engines as the biker with the puppy rode toward the vet. The sound faded slowly. The boy lowered his head and took a deep breath. The room felt safe but unfamiliar, like stepping into a world he wasn't sure he was allowed to enter. The older biker sat on the floor a few feet away, giving him space. He talked quietly about nothing urgent. How dogs healed fast when given a chance, how their club took care of each other, how his own childhood had been rough in ways he didn't detail. He didn't try to extract the boy's past. He just let silence fill the spaces between sentences. Hours later, the rider with the puppy returned. He stepped into the garage, shaking off leftover rain. The boy stood immediately. The biker said the dog was stable. Infection had started, but the vet had begun treatment. The puppy would need rest and medicine for several days. He added that his daughter cried when she saw the puppy again, relief overwhelming fear. She asked who had found him. She wanted to thank the boy. The boy looked down. He wasn't used to being thanked, and he didn't know where to place the feeling. The biker told him he didn't have to meet her yet, only when he was ready. The boy nodded again, grateful for the choice. The night ended with the boy wrapped in a clean blanket, listening to the soft hum of a space heater and the quiet presence of men who didn't ask him to justify his existence. For the first time in a long time, survival didn't feel like something he had to do alone. 2 months passed. Winter loosened its grip, and the mornings no longer cut through the boy's skin the way they once had. He still moved carefully through the town, but he no longer drifted without direction. The Steel Guardians had arranged a small room for him above the community garage. Nothing more than a mattress, a lamp, a heater that clicked loudly when it turned on, and a window overlooking the road. But it was his. No one chased him from it. No one yelled at him for existing in the wrong place. The puppy healed slowly. The infection left a stiffness in its leg that would probably never disappear completely, but it walked again. It limped, but it didn't struggle. The biker's daughter visited the garage often, carrying the dog in her arms, even when it didn't need to be carried. She sat near the boy, placing the puppy between them. She talked about school, about drawings she made, about how she hadn't slept the night the dog went missing. She didn't ask him uncomfortable questions. She didn't ask why he had been alone. She just treated him as someone who mattered. The boy learned to speak a few words at a time. He wasn't used to conversation, but the girl didn't push him. The puppy moved between them with quiet confidence, lying against whichever of them needed warmth. The bond that had formed on the streets didn't fade. It simply widened to include another person. The Steel Guardians remained present, but not overwhelming. They checked on him every few days. One brought warm clothing. Another brought leftover food from a community event. A third taught him how to clean tools in the garage, giving him something to do with his hands. They didn't act as rescuers or saviors. They simply behaved as people who understood what it meant to survive hard years and come out the other side carrying scars. The boy still had bad nights. Some evenings he woke sweating, remembering the cold bus floor or the men shouting behind him. On those nights, he sat by the window, watching the empty road until his breathing steadied. Sometimes a motorcycle passed, slow and steady, its engine familiar. He didn't know if it was intentional, but the sound helped. He didn't return to school yet. That step required paperwork, adults, and explanations he wasn't ready to give. The bikers didn't force the issue. They focused on what he needed immediately: food, safety, a bed, and people who didn't vanish when things became difficult. The puppy spent most days near the garage, wearing a small harness so it wouldn't wander into the street. When the boy walked outside, it followed him, tail moving with uneven rhythm. Its limp was permanent, but it didn't seem bothered. It stayed close, the same way it had in the rain. The biker's daughter continued visiting. Her father stayed nearby each time, giving them space, but never far from reach. He carried gratitude quietly, expressing it through actions instead of speeches. He repaired the loose window in the boy's room. He replaced the heater when it began to fail. He left bags of dog food by the door. He made sure the boy always had a way to contact them. Life didn't transform into something perfect. The boy still struggled with crowds. He still hesitated when someone new tried to speak to him. He still stored extra food in his room out of habit. But he no longer felt invisible. And he no longer walked the streets wondering how long the puppy would survive. That question had been replaced by something steadier. One afternoon, sitting outside the garage, the boy watched the puppy nap beside him. Sunlight warmed the concrete. The biker's daughter drew beside them, sketching the scene on a notepad. She told him her dad said the dog wouldn't have lived without him. The boy didn't answer. He just rested his hand on the dog's back. The puppy shifted, placing its head on his foot. Somewhere down the road, a group of motorcycles approached, their engines steady and familiar. The sound no longer made him tense. It made him aware that he wasn't alone in the world. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he would face it with a little more stability, a little more strength, and a dog who had learned to survive beside him. Follow the channel for more stories like this, quiet, human, and real.